It's Brian Neiman with C4 here for the next half hour talking about coronavirus and the impact on not only your health, but also your health, right? I mean, the whole world is watching this, and it is impacting us here in a big way in the United States. The good news is the numbers have been better here in Maryland. We are joined now by Molly Hyde, MHS CIC Infection Control Practitioner at GBMC. It is great to have you on. So I've been wondering this for quite some time now. We turn the TV on, the radio on in the morning, and we hear about upticks in places like Florida and Texas and Arizona and California, yet the numbers in Maryland are down, and that story was reversed a month ago. So how do you make sense of why some places are worse than others, especially as the entire country kind of slowly reopens its economy?
Well, a lot of it depends on the social distancing measures and public health measures that were put in place. So different states put different public health measures in place. So Maryland did have some of the strictest public health measures that were put in, other states not as strict. So that accounts for a lot of the discrepancy between Maryland and other states. Less strict means you're going to have more cases.
Molly Hyde is on board with us, Infection Control Practitioner at GBMC. And when it comes to the issue of wearing masks, particularly now, Molly Hyde, that it's getting warm and everything, the social distance, 6 feet, the mask, why is that all still so important?
It also is so important because this virus is still here. It has not gone away. We've done a really great job of flattening the curve and reducing the level of transmission, but we have not eliminated this virus, not by any stretch. It's still here and it still is being transmitted. So that's why it's so critically important to continue these measures, because as soon as we take them away, these numbers are going to go back up.
Is it as potent as it was, though, in March? I've heard a couple of different doctors, one in Milan in Italy, another doctor in Pittsburgh, say, it's just not as severe as it was before. What are you seeing with this virus? Is it as potent as it was a couple of months ago?
The severity of the virus is really highly variable. Certain people are more likely to get much more severe disease than other people. So, for example, people who are elderly, people with certain underlying conditions are much more likely to get a severe disease than people without. This virus is kind of unusual in that it has such a wide range of symptoms. Some people don't have any symptoms at all. Some people have extremely severe disease. But we haven't really seen any sort of consistency with a reduction in severity over time.
You're listening to the coronavirus. It's our third Townhall special, WBAL News Radio 1090 and FM 101.5, along with GBMC Healthcare. We're talking with Molly Hyde, Infection Control Practitioner at GBMC. All right, we're opening up restaurants again, only at 50% capacity. But when we're in restaurants and indoors, how do we do that safely, Molly Hyde?
The safest thing you can do is really stay away from other people. So I know a lot of restaurants now are spacing their tables out 6 feet, which is great. Now, of course, your server is still going to have to bring you food, and they're going to have to come within 6 feet of you to bring you that food. So you do want to be wearing your mask at times where you are within 6 feet of other people, except for, of course, the household member that you might be dining with. But you really do want to make sure you're wearing that mask when you're coming into the restaurant. But as long as you're 6 feet away from other people, of course, you can't eat with your mask on, so it is okay to then take off your mask for the purposes of eating. But really staying away from other people who are not your household members are going to be the best way to avoid getting sick.
All right. What about the testing? And testing, I mean, not only for coronavirus, but also the antibody testing. And I've heard a lot of complaints from people who have had it. It takes a long time to get the results back. Is that getting any better? How accurate do you think they are, both the coronavirus test and the antibody testing?
So in terms of getting the results back, at the beginning when there were very few tests available, it was taking a very long time to get the results back. Now we do have a pretty wide availability of tests, so it is a lot quicker, which is fantastic. In terms of accuracy, so there's two different tests, and I think it's important to understand the difference between the antibody test, so that's the blood test, and the molecular test, the swab, which is a PCR test. So the difference between those two tests is the blood test is actually just seeing if you've had an exposure. Have you been exposed and have you likely gotten infected? It's not necessarily diagnosing you with infection. So the antibody tests are generally telling you, have you had an exposure? And they're generally showing that exposure a week to maybe 3 weeks after you've been exposed. So it can't necessarily tell you that you have coronavirus right now. Now, they're pretty accurate if you test at the right time. Timing is everything when it comes to the antibody test. If you test too early, you're not going to get an accurate result. For the diagnostic test, so that's the one that's actually going to diagnose you with COVID. That's the nasal swab. For those tests, the accuracy can vary, but it's generally thought to be about 70 to 75% accurate.
That doesn't sound great, though.
Right.
No, it's not great. Keep in mind, though, I think it's important for people to understand that no diagnostic test is 100%. So, the flu test is not 100%. No diagnostic test is 100%, which is another reason why we still want to be taking all of these public health measures like wearing your mask and social distancing. Even if you do go get tested and test negative, you still want to make sure you're wearing your mask and doing everything you need to be doing.
Is it more accurate, though? If it's positive, is it likely to be positive versus if it's negative, then it may not be, it may be false negative?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a really great point. So there's kind of two measures of a test. There's your sensitivity and your specificity. And they basically tell you your chance of getting a false negative or your chance of getting a false positive. The chance of getting a false positive is extremely low. So if you got a positive COVID test, you very likely have COVID. The chance of a false negative is much higher.
Molly Hyde of GBMC, she's infection control practitioner. When it comes to traveling, a lot of people want to get out with their families, been cooped up for the last few months in travel. We were told initially, if you go to another state and come back 2-week quarantine, what's your advice if folks want to travel out of state?
When you travel out of state, it's really critically important to make sure you're checking the local regulations for the place that you're traveling, because some states still do have those measures in place where you do have to quarantine for 14 days. So if you're planning on going on vacation to a state like Vermont, where that is in effect, you're basically going to be stuck in your hotel the entire time you're there. So it really is important to check the local regulations before you go to make sure that you don't need to quarantine. If the regulations say it's okay, that you can travel and you don't need to quarantine, you still do need to be social distancing and wearing your mask and taking all those other public health measures.
We were told, and Dr. Fauci said this the other day, he's worried about baseball in October because the weather is going to be getting colder, or worried about the second wave in the fall and the wintertime, and also maybe that the heat and humidity would help in all of this. But we see numbers up in Florida and Texas and Arizona where it's really warm. So does the weather play any impact on this, Doctor? So
it's likely that numbers will go up in the fall simply because that's respiratory viral season. Most respiratory viruses increase in the fall and the winter. If you think about it, you're more likely to get a cold, you're more likely to get a flu in the fall and winter. That's probably going to hold true with this virus as well. But that doesn't mean that these viruses just disappear in the summer or they're completely killed off by heat and humidity. It's likely that you'll see less of a spread in the summer, but they don't go away completely.
Finally, Molly Hyde, infection control practitioner at GBMC. You're listening to the WBAL Coronavirus Town Hall. When it comes to these protests, how concerned are you as they've now been going on for 3 weeks, continuing very little social distancing, most people wearing masks, but some aren't? How concerned are you?
I mean, with any large gathering, there is, of course, the risk of transmission. I think that people who are exercising their right to protest do need to take public health measures into consideration. They should be trying to stay away from other people as much as possible.
They're not doing it.
Yeah, they are not. They need to absolutely be wearing their masks. Absolutely. If you are out at one of these protests, you need to be wearing your mask because that's going to protect the people around you. If you do feel like you have an exposure, if you do display symptoms, if you are at all worried, please take advantage of the free tests that you can get through the Maryland Department of Health. You don't need a doctor's appointment. You can just go right up and you can get yourself tested. So it is really, really important to consider public health measures if you are participating in these protests.
Molly, great to have you on. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.